Good. All right. So as we go to start part two, we're going to start talking about proper dive planning. And so the idea is we're building a plan. And when we start getting into diving, it gets pretty important. It's a lot like driving a car, right? You can only go so far before bad things happen, right? Same thing with flying. You have to make a plan. You have to know where the airports are, right? Well, same thing with diving. We can only stay down so long before we run out of what's called the NDL, or non-decompression limits. That's what NDL stands for. It's the NOAA limits. And they were developed by the Navy. And so we start talking about some basic dive planning and some basic terminology. The first thing we want to talk about is bottom time in our dive planning. So the bottom time of our dive is going to be measured from the beginning of the direct descent to the beginning of the direct ascent. That's how we measure bottom time. Okay. The NDL, the non-decompression limit, is the amount of time we can stay down without having to do a mandatory decompression stop. Anything other than that, we can do a direct ascent to the surface. Now, a safety stop is part of that.
Okay, so direct ascent to the surface includes a safety stop.
Yes.
Okay.
But here's the catch. Is a safety stop required?
Well, from what you just said, no.
No. It's encouraged. It's strongly encouraged to add that level of safety, but it's not required. If something happens and you blow a safety stop, if you stayed within the NDL, you should be just fine. But it also comes down to the idea that, do I have to stop at the yield sign?
You
No.
probably should.
You probably should.
Yeah, but if you needed to.
If you were cleared, it was, whatever, you could blow through it. And most likely nothing's going to happen, right? So a safety stop is just that. It's a safety stop. It adds safety to the dynamic. Okay. The other thing we're going to talk about is the dive profile. And this is important. We always want to make sure that we're doing, in multi-level diving, and multi-day diving, and multi-day diving, that we're doing our deepest dive first, and then everything from that point out is shallower. That's the profile of the dive that we're working with. Now, if we start doing shallow first and then deep, we're doing what's called a reverse profile. The problem with reverse profile is the algorithm that is built for us, it doesn't have a way to accurately monitor and put together a dive profile based upon a reverse dynamic. It screws the algorithm up. You can go forward through the algorithm, but you can't go backwards. Okay?
So in a single dive, what I'm understanding is that we want to go the deepest we're going to go on that dive, and then that single dive, and
Yeah,
Or is that also part of multiple dives?
it does.
Okay.
Absolutely. So our first dive of the day is going to be our deepest, and the deepest part of our dive is going to be the beginning.
Okay.
so it applies in both.
And what about multi-day? Like if you're going out for a 5-day trip?
Absolutely. We're going to get to that in just a moment.
Gotcha.
For multi-day diving. And there actually is a dynamic with that as well.
Okay.
So we've talked about geyser gas quite a bit. That's nitrox. It cruises safety margins quite a bit. But let's take a look at the reason why. Another reason why we talked about the energy level from it. But what about the length of the dive? Because I promised you guys that if you do nitrox, you can dive for longer. So for example, let's look at a 60-foot dive here. On this being on air is this first table right here. The Doppler limit is the maximum amount of time I can do on a dive. Okay, so a 60-foot dive, I have a maximum time on air of 50 minutes. But if I breathe 36% nitrox, I can do it for 70 minutes. A little different? Or 69 minutes, sorry. So, or 60, I'm sorry, as I was. I'm 60 feet, at 57 feet, I could do 130 minutes. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain aneurysm apparently. Apparently I have DCS today. So 60-foot dive for 50 minutes or a 57-foot dive for 130 minutes. So almost 2.5 times the amount of time on a 36% blend of nitrox at 60 feet. 2.5 times. That's a lot. And you notice this throughout the whole process. So a 90-foot dive is 20 minutes. On air, it is 40 minutes at 94 feet at 36% nitrox. So you get longer amounts of time. So that's why I push nitrox is longer, safer, more energy, right? So as we read this dive table, it's pretty straightforward. this is table 1 of 3. As we look through it, it's very simple. First we determine what we're breathing. We're breathing air. The next thing we figure out is our depth. We're going to dive to 60 feet. From that point, we can determine our maximum dive time on a 60-minute dive is 50 minutes. But what happens if we dive less time? There's absolutely a benefit for that. So for example, if we dive for 50 minutes, we become an H group diver, which means that we have an H level of nitrogen in our system. The nitrogen on this table is registered A through K. A being very little nitrogen, K being a crap load of nitrogen. So we become an H group diver, which means we have a fairly significant amount of nitrogen left in our system that we have to do something about. Right. Okay? So my encouragement as you look at this is never push your limits. Yeah. That's going to be my first thing, idea in dive planning. So if we're going to plan out, you and I are going diving together, we look at it, and we know we're going to do a 60-foot dive, we're going to plan our dive for 40 minutes instead of 50 minutes.
Lower nitrogen category.
Exactly. Yeah. But what happens if we get out there and we see something really cool?
We could stay longer.
We could stay longer.
Yeah.
But if we planned it for 50 minutes and we saw the cool thing at the 49-minute mark, we're baked. Yeah. We're at that level. Yeah. Okay? So always plan with some safety margin built in. Yeah. It's part of that idea we talked about with the 500 PSI. Same thing with the amount of time we're going to dive. So if we know we can do 50 minutes, let's go ahead and plan for 40 minutes instead, and allow ourselves an emergency amount of time that we don't, where we're not right at the limit. Because I can tell you right now, a lot of divers will get stressed if they see that I have 1 minute to NDL. They will start freaking out, and it becomes panic because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to break deco. Well, that's not the end of the world. There are absolutely plans around that. It's just not a good idea as a new diver to break the non-decompression limits.
So I know there's some like no Doppler limits on the table. Like if you go to 32 feet on nitrox, there's no time.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean?
There's no. You have unlimited time at 20 feet or 32 feet on nitrox. Okay. You're not breathing a high enough concentrate of nitrogen to be a problem.
I see. Okay, like you will run out.
It doesn't calculate into the.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
Exactly.
It's not in the formula for the.
Exactly. So if you went to 38 feet on partial pressure, 36% nitrox, you have 245 minutes. Now that is a long dive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's a 4.5 hour dive.
Yeah.
So.
But that's the max.
For
if you go to that, you're in column I.
Yep.
Okay. Gotcha.
Exactly. So a ton of nitrogen. Yeah. So if just to make sure we have this, if I went and did a 35-foot dive, what is the maximum amount of time for a 35-foot dive on air? Exactly. How about 50 feet? David?
70 minutes.
Absolutely. So if I did a 40-foot dive for 50 minutes, what is my letter group?
40-foot dive, 50 minutes. On air?
On air. 40 foot for 50 minutes makes me, what letter group does that put me in?
I don't see 50 minutes on 40 feet.
Right here, and we scroll over. So here's our times.
Oh.
So 40 feet. We come over here to 50 minutes, and then we just simply come down.
Okay, I thought the minutes would get that Doppler limit.
That's the total. That's the limit. But we don't have to do the limit. We can do less.
Got it. So 40 feet, 50 minutes, we're in that.
Absolutely. All right, Keelan. If we went to 60 feet for 30 minutes, what's our letter group? Correct. And how about, David, 20 feet for 180 minutes?
Air, we're in F.
Mm-hmm. And Keelan, 70 feet for 30 minutes? Exactly. So doing a lot of Fs, right? Yeah. Just make sure that you get it. So that's how you figure out your letter group. What letter group I'm in. And where that becomes important is it gives me the idea of how much residual nitrogen I have in my system. So where that
sorry.
Go ahead.
Will the computer keep track of this?
It'll do it automatically for you. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it'll help you dive plan as well. And we're going to get into exactly why a dive computer is so freaking awesome.
All my sister who got certified 10 years ago. I said, what are your thoughts on a dive computer? She said, what's a dive computer? Okay, well, there's certification, then there's certification.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to go through absolutely why that dive computer is so important. So where this comes in, and we start getting the idea, we want to figure out what our residual nitrogen time is, and how much residual nitrogen we have in our system determines how long we can do our next dive. So we want to be able to figure out what happens if I stay out of the water for a specific amount of time. So for example, we were an F group diver, and we realized that there's two numbers that are super important. I have to stay out of the water for at least 10 minutes for it to become a repetitive dive. If it's less than 10 minutes, it's a continuation of the same dive. Okay, so 10 minutes is the minimum of time that I can stay out of the water before it becomes a repetitive dive.
Gotcha.
Okay, 12 hours becomes the start of a new dive day. Okay, so those are two important numbers. So for example, if I'm an F group diver, which we've hit quite a bit, and I only stayed out for 10 minutes and less than 45 minutes, I remain an F group diver. But if I want to blow off some of that nitrogen, because we'd realized that higher letters are good, lower letters mean lots of nitrogen, and I stay on the boat for example, an hour, that means I become an E group diver. It's E's higher than F, so I have less nitrogen.
How do I know I'm an E group diver? Because it goes.
Because you're back in that.
Yep. So I've gone over 46 minutes, but less than an hour, 20 minutes, and so I scroll back down.
Oh, I'm
So
looking at the E's on the right. Okay, so
The diagonal line is your starting point, right?
Yep.
And then the others.
Yep. So I started with F. I worked my way down, and then I just came across. And so I was out of the water for more than an hour, or more than 46 minutes, and out for less than an hour, 20 minutes. And that keeps going. And these are a range of numbers. So if I'm out for 4 hours, but less than 7 hours, I become a B group diver. Here's where it becomes really important. This is how I figure out for my next dive. So if I only stay out for 10 minutes and I'm still an F group diver and I want to go on another dive to 50 feet, I come over to 50 feet as an F group diver. White is penalty, green is go.
Okay.
So the white tells me how much residual nitrogen I have in my system, or another way to look at it is before I get in the water, that's how much time I have to count that I've already dove.
I see.
That I don't get to dive again because I've already dove that.
Okay.
Before I get in the water. So on a 50-foot dive, as an F group diver, I only can dive for 50 feet for 23 minutes.
Is that at being at that depth for 23 minutes, or is that the entire dive?
Nope, it's at that depth.
Okay.
So we're basing everything right now on a box profile.
Okay, right. So at the bottom of the
exactly.
box. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that so now you can see really quickly, if I stayed out of the water, remember, for that hour time and I moved myself up to an E group diver, all of a sudden now, instead of having 23 minutes at 50 feet, I now have 32 minutes at 50 feet because I have residual nitrogen of only 38 versus 47. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you go through and you add these numbers, 6 and 64 makes 70. 13 and 57 makes
70.
21 and 49? They're all 70.
Yeah.
Let's go back and look at chart 1 at 50 feet. 50 feet, the maximum time is 70 minutes. So chart 1 and chart 3 equal each other.
And it's showing like the max possible.
Exactly.
For like the nitrogen in your system.
So what ends up happening is what we're telling you on this chart is this is the time I can actually dive because this is how much penalty I have because of the previous dive. Leftover nitrogen. It's called residual nitrogen. Make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely. All right.
None of this was in the book.
It should be in the book.
Not
Reach that
1
part.
through 5.
So I'm going to let you guys use my computer. And you can up and down arrow through this. Or you can pull out your app.
Oh yeah.
It is on the app under tables. If you're going to use your app, then I'll use this. So let's plan some dives and let's work the system together. And these are all based on the square profile.
Okay. Looking for tables. Oh yeah. I see it. Okay.
Should be green.
Gotcha.
Can you be colorblind and be a pilot?
At night.
Okay. Come over to the laminated portion of the board here and get a marker that works.
So if you go scroll down.
All right.
The only reason I'm using the app is so I can.
That's a great thing to do. All right. So we're going to go ahead and do a dive together. Let's go ahead and plan out. Dive 1, let's do 60 feet. As we look at the depth, what's the maximum amount of time we can do on dive 1? 60 feet on air.
I'm not seeing 60.
Yeah, I was gonna say this table actually is
I don't-
different.
Oh, because you opened it up in metric. So you
Oh,
want
yep,
to
you're right.
you wanna slide that over
not
to-
imperial.
Oh,
Okay. Okay.
I just saw English.
Yep,
Okay.
English metric and English imperial.
All
We'll-
right, now we're at 60 feet, so the max is.
Yep. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and plan. Let's go ahead and pull back a little bit. Instead of doing 50, let's go ahead and do 40.
Okay.
So 60 feet are action, and this is going to be actual time, residual nitrogen, total time. Okay. So 60 feet, our actual time is going to be 40 minutes. This is dive 1. How much residual nitrogen do we have on dive 1?
Well, it makes us.
And it could it be a trick question? If you don't order pizza, can you have leftovers? If you haven't done a dive, would you have residual of something of a dive? So your residual nitrogen would be 0, right?
0 because this is your
First dive, number 1 dive,
So you're starting at
we start at 0.
Now, when you say first dive, does that mean?
Our first dive of the day.
Okay, so it doesn't count if you dove yesterday.
It doesn't. Remember, a new dive day starts after 12 hours. So as long as it's been more than 12 hours, we're starting a brand new dive day. So if our actual time is 40 minutes and our residual time is 0, what's our total time? 40 minutes. Ding, ding, ding. Pretty complicated math, right? Overall. So if we did a 60-foot dive for 40 minutes, what letter group does that put us in? Do you concur, David? Correct. Okay. So we're on our dive boat. We stay out of the water for 1 hour. This is going to be table 2. If we, as a G group diver, we stay out for an hour, what is our new letter group?
Yeah.
Both see that? Great. That's exactly right. Okay. So we're going to do dive 2. Let's do 50 feet. Easy enough? Now, we know we're an F group diver. At 50 feet, as an F group diver, what is the maximum amount of time I can spend down? 23 minutes. So let's go ahead and plan out 20 minutes.
It's on this table, and so you're an F group diver. And if you go to this column, 50
You're on
feet.
table 3.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yep, you have to go to table 3. F group
So
diver, scroll down.
Find the feet. Yeah.
23 is exactly right. So I'd put 20 for safety. How much residual nitrogen do we have on that 50-foot dive as an F group diver? 47. Okay, so our total time now is what? We did a 20-minute dive, but it's going to be equal to 67 minutes. Easy enough? Now, here's where it gets easy. Go back to table 1. At 50 feet for 67 minutes, what's my new letter group? Sure.
Oh, wait, oh, 50, yeah.
50 feet.
Yeah,
70 minutes is I.
Exactly. Good job. I just like questioning you. Yeah, just because I question you doesn't mean you're wrong. Doesn't mean you're right. Doesn't mean you're wrong. I'm just making sure that you've checked yourself. So we're an I group diver. So that's how we come around, and that's how we figure out for our next letter group. Easy enough. So we know we're an I group diver. We're going to stay out of the water for this time. Let's have some lunch. So let's go ahead and stay out for 3 hours. We'll have some lunch, a couple of virgin margaritas. Life is good. So
This is in D.
absolutely. There you go. So now we're a D group diver coming out of the water. Our next dive of the day is going to be 40 feet. Easy enough. So as a D group diver to 40 feet, what is the maximum amount of time I can go down?
93.
93 minutes? So let's say 60 minutes. 60 minutes is a nice dive. So what's our residual nitrogen at 40 feet as a D group diver?
Are we going off 60?
40 feet.
That would,
40 feet. So as a D group diver, the 40 feet, what's our residual nitrogen?
well, this is 37.
37.
But you use 60. You're for 60 minutes instead of 93.
But we can go up to 93 minutes, but the residual nitrogen is not going to
It's the
change because
same.
that's what's left
So
over from
that's
our previous dive. That's
Still
our
not-
penalty from the
yeah.
previous dive. We can't
Yeah.
change that one.
So that's still 37.
We can change the amount of time we spend down. Well, we can't change the amount of time that we're not. So at this point, we're down for 97 minutes total time is our new time. So at 40 feet for 97 minutes, what is our new letter group? Who do you call Brenda? Carnahan?
97.
So I.
I.
So I group diver. So 40 feet. And you round it up, so that's good. That's how we do it. Should we go through and do one more set? You guys picked it up pretty fast.
Or we just look at the dive computer.
Or you can just look at the dive computer. You can absolutely use the dive computer for your planning. Absolutely. All right. So we're going to do some a little bit bigger dives just to prove things. What if we did a 100-foot dive on our first dive for 35 minutes?
Do it.
I'm going to put us on pause and pick this up in just a minute.